Thank you all for coming. I want to thank John for providing this wonderful venue. This is really, really impressive. I first came to IABC New Orleans in 1998 when I moved to LSU from University of Illinois and was looking for and brought my IABC membership with me. And I've known John since then. He was somewhere in the Maroney with 3 employees, and he certainly has grown. And I think he's grown because he has a lot to offer a lot of people, a lot of clients, and he has a lot to offer us. So I'm glad he's here. To start what's going to be an interesting season of professional development meetings that John is sponsoring. So keep your eye out for the other ones that are coming along. There's a short list on the table by the sandwiches. I also want to mention that this is International Membership Month for IABC. So anybody who is not a member who would like to join the organization, the IABC International will waive the $40 registration membership fee this month. So if you're interested, go online or ask one of us who are on the local board, and that includes Tamar. She is on our local board, and Julie. At the expense of not going through and making everybody stand up and tell you who they are, I'm going to just bring John up and he can get started. John, thank you very much.
So I do want to put a commercial plug. Rick mentioned that. Please grab one of these on your way out. 2 of the programs that are coming up in November, H.K. Stewart is coming here from Little Rock, Arkansas. I've known H.K. for a long time. He is a master presenter and an incredible person in teaching and motivating creativity. And he's speaking on creativity in the communicator. And then in March, we have John Clemens coming to us from Walmart, and he's presenting the best practices of Walmart. I've heard an excerpt of that, and it's really exciting stuff. So grab one of these and put this on the calendar. There was some research done. I think it's now been about 10 years. It was a group in California that looked at 2,000 one-hour presentations. Now, that's not a glimpse of hell. I sit through 2,000 60-minute presentations. Well, what this group found was that in 60 minutes of content, there was 5 minutes of really usable, take it back to the office, put it to work for you today content. Which excited me, because I thought the next time I needed to present, we have a little more than an hour today. But next time I need to present, I would just do 5 minutes. Or if I was sitting in a seminar, I just think, well, it turns out that each person has a different 5 minutes. So that I love for the ground rules for our time today together to make it most productive for you is to put you in charge of your 5 minutes. So don't save questions till the end. If something comes up, if you have a question, or if you have an anecdote or an experience that you want to share with the group, jump in and let's do that. I'll get us through this content, but I think that way our time will be most productive. Does that sound fair? Great. So let me tell you what it is. We are just putting the finishing touches on some significant research that we did, and I want to talk to you about that. Now, the research was, the premise was how messaging is most persuasive and compelling to C-suite leaders from a nonprofit or corporate social responsibility perspective. And so the C-suite leaders were people that were president, vice president, COO, so very top positions, all US-based companies, geographically spread, all with more than 50 employees. So this is the research that came out of it. We did an online bulletin board and got really robust information. So there's a lot of content here, and we have handouts. If we don't have them here, we will get them to you so you can have all the content that's on the slides at your fingertips. So the first thing I want to talk about is just an overview of what the research showed us. Some of the things that really stood out as significant in talking to these corporate suite leaders was identifying the right relationship and the right business organization to partner with. Then how to communicate with that potential corporate sponsor. And then something that the part of it that I think is most significant, most fascinating, was really the messaging evidence. How the communication should be delivered, what information, how they want it delivered, what mix of information was most compelling and persuasive for them. And then last, framing. The tone of the information and how you present it to them and how that can make a difference in getting corporate leaders to buy into it. Now, while this was all done with the idea of it being a nonprofit and talking about corporate social responsibility programs, these facts and these insights hold true regardless. So even if it's a business-to-business communication, I think you're going to find that the results and the recommendations that came out of the research make perfect sense even in a B2B setting, or if you are some consumer organization trying to make a difference and trying to get a business and business leaders to buy into it. So the first thing I want to touch on is the framework of this. The premise that we used had to do with corporate social responsibility. And I look back, and in 1996, I did a presentation about community relations that builds the bottom line. And resurrected that and looked through it. And it turns out some of those things I think are just as apt today. It's the things that we're doing and you're doing with your clients and your organizations that are still true. The fact that community relations can go directly to the bottom line of a for-profit or corporate entity. The fact that you need to have big picture. The fact that connecting with a community really gives you power and authority. And that you need a broad-based level of support and understanding to do that. And the structure of the campaigns haven't changed much. Do that research first, identify what the reality is and what you want to change, and then build a strategy, present it to get approval, build that, implement it, and evaluate it. So not a lot has changed. Well, I've aged significantly, but the reality of the work has not changed at all. And in fact, in looking at it, in 2011, we started working with a $23 billion global manufacturing giant. And we did we did thought leadership campaigns, we did really targeted media relations for what they did. They were experts globally in really building everything that we use. So they built the phones that we use and computers and technology. They were leaders in clean tech, automotive. We also worked with them on looking at corporate social responsibility. And the way that came out was we helped them develop their first global strategic plan for their communication efforts. They had divided the world into 3 regions, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And so it was fascinating because when working with them, one of the quotes that came out from, and this was from the senior marketing director for their European operations, said corporate social responsibility is the top concern of customers throughout the European Union. And that thrilled me. I thought finally we had arrived. That now business enterprise was saying that the most important thing was corporate social responsibility. So not just build what we need to build, but be good corporate citizens. I was so excited, I asked him about that. Turns out I was wrong. I misread it. It wasn't that we've arrived and now we are living in this altruistic nirvana type society at all. What he said was that, especially in manufacturing, some of their larger clients recognize that when there are problems with the communities in which these things are built or developed, it can slow or delay production. And one of the things that he was talking about was, and I don't know if you remember this, but in 2010, the only manufacturing organization larger than our client was one that was called Foxconn. It still is Foxconn, and it's owned and run by the Chinese government. And what was discovered was that 18 employees had taken their own lives over the course of 10 months. And when the story broke, initially it was reported that 2 employees had taken their own lives, but actually 16 different suicides had been had not been reported. So Foxconn, in response, what they did was they built a net around just below the roof line of the building. So because what their employees were doing was they would finish their 14-hour shift, clock out, and they would go up to the roof and leave to their death. Now, I'll tell you, I am inherently lazy. I would not have finished my 14-hour shift. But they would leave, and the net were to catch them to try and keep them from dying. I will tell you, electronics, on the other hand, had a really robust, thoughtful corporate social responsibility program. And even though they had similar facilities, building the same products in similar areas of China and other parts of the world, they had not experienced any suicides. So their corporate social responsibility programs were really working. They were building housing. They were also creating entertainment and educational outreach programs because they would have up to 200,000 employees at these facilities. So they had to provide, and they had to build basically a city to support them. So corporate social responsibility for them went straight to the bottom line. And one of the headlines was 1 million workers, 90 million iPhones, 17 suicides, who's to blame? Got a lot of coverage, and the Chinese government really kind of reeled, and they're still coming back from that, I think. So what is the balance between altruism and capitalism? And it's interesting because if you look at our society, especially if you look at Western society or the US, apartheid, in my opinion, stands out as a real milestone. I think that's the first time that we collectively decided that we would use our wallets to do good, that we wouldn't just purchase things, but we would make informed, compassionate decisions. So we would decide not to buy products or support corporate entities that were in any way affiliated with apartheid. And in my opinion, that's really where that approach to corporate social responsibility became widespread, where we started acting collectively, and collectively with a conscience and with purpose. And there's so much more of it today. MoveOn.org and other organizations have such power and influence. I was just in Chicago with a WorldCom group on crisis, and we were talking about specifically how to manage crisis situation where are protests or protesters at MoveOn.org. And it's impressive, I think, and it's such a positive sign about our growth as a society that we don't differentiate any of our action from social responsibility. So how can your message be both strategic and compelling at the same time and add people to your support network? Partnerships in cost-related marketing really are the focus of it. And what has to happen is it has to be successful for both entities. So it needs to foster sales or the business interest of the organization, but it can also increase donations or increase brand awareness for the organization, the nonprofit as well as the for-profit. And how you can balance those two things and make those connections is exactly what we're talking about. Any questions? Everyone's in charge of their 5 minutes? Still? All right. So business potential, one of the first things that we talked about was identifying who the right people are for this. What is the business potential that happens between them? And every one of the leaders said that it's vital to the health of a nonprofit organization to be socially responsible. So there was not a single differing opinion from these corporate leaders that corporate social responsibility was important, that it was the right thing to do, that there was any reason not to, and that it also helped the bottom line of their organization. In other words, being good citizens meant that they were good business leaders as well. And to an organization, they said that their organizations were not only involved in what they felt were corporate social responsibility programs, but they were all open to having more activity in corporate social responsibility. So identifying donors. This identification was really an important part of what was discussed. Part of it was a relevance between the cause or the corporate social responsibility element and the business itself. So and we're going to talk about alignment in a little bit. Alignment stood out as one of the most significant things for us to communicate, to compel and persuade them to join the cause or to donate or to support what's happening. But here they're talking about it as relevance. And that alignment can be in corporate philosophy, in their mission, their business goals, target audience, shared community, employee interests. And it doesn't have to check all those boxes. But you need to demonstrate that whatever you're reaching out about is important to their employees, or it can be in sync with their mission and their purpose. It could be that it serves the same geographic community that their business serves. So what's important is that relevancy and the connection between the for-profit entity and the cause that's being promoted. Now the business connection, the business focus of what you need to communicate has to do with how those contributions, not fellowships, how the contributions, how those connections will make a difference. Will it improve the community? And the benefit for the company from the donation. And what's interesting is the benefit for the company does not have to be dollars and cents. It doesn't have to be an increased stock value. It doesn't have to be an increase in market share. In fact, while those things are important, they're also just as open to the sort of things that pure public relations provides. So greater awareness, being seen as a good citizen or a corporate leader. They are looking for more robust connection. So being one of the 18 logos on the back of a race t-shirt isn't going to resonate. It's not that they wouldn't appreciate that, but when we're talking about a communication, something that's going to persuade them to join the cause, that's not going to do it. But think about other opportunities. If you can tie it to their driving sales or stock price, that's great. But they said equal value would be awareness of their corporate citizenship, recognition. But the recognition needs to be spelled out, needs to be somewhat significant so that they know, not only do they want to know that their participation will make a difference in the cause or the situation that's being addressed, also their awareness and their recognition will make a difference to them. An emotional connection. So this emotional connection has to do with understanding what the corporate decision makers, what those leaders already think they know about you, your entity, or the cause that you're dealing with, and what that feeling is. So it's that pre-existing knowledge, and it's, you know, we worked with Dow locally, and one of the first things we did was we analyzed their situation. We looked at all their community giving, all their advertising, their sponsorship. We also looked at the corporate goals of what they were trying to accomplish as a global entity. They had just identified some new, very focused goals. One of them was they want to be recognized as a leader in green topics, to be environmental leaders in improving the environment and improving the opportunity for others to help with the environment. They also wanted to be seen as innovators, which makes good sense for their business, and to be leaders. One of the projects that we tied into them, and actually Justin Root on our team is who led this initiative, and I think he's live streaming and watching it. He sent a tweet earlier, so Justin, I'm giving you all the credit for this. Justin led a partnership between Dow and Audubon Species Survival Center. The Species Survival Center was looking at bringing back a flock of cranes that had not been in the wild, indigenous to Louisiana, but had not been in the wild for more than 60 years. The partnership, Dow funded it, and within 18 months, covert, a large flock of cranes were returned to White Lake near Lake Charles, Louisiana, and they're still there. And what was nice about it is that partnership was dead center with Dow being seen as an environmental leader, a leader being innovative, partnering with a nonprofit that was being an environmental leader, and also innovative. This worked out so well that Dow's global leader for innovation and environmental leadership came down and used this event and the announcement of this gift as the launch of their global initiative because they felt that it resonated so well. That's exactly the type of communication. You want to make sure that the relevance to their mission and what they're trying to achieve matches the partnership. Now, we weren't Audubon, but we got to know what Dow wanted and what they were looking for. We also learned what Audubon was trying to accomplish, and we brought those two together. I'll also tell you, in the personality of your institution, how are you perceived? Are you innovative? Are you enthusiastic? Are you a social leader? Are you entrepreneurial? Those sort of keys will help you identify better corporate sponsors, and also in communicating that that's who you are. That will help those corporate sponsors agree to and be persuaded to support you. Some of the research also told us that you're not predetermined. So if they think they understand your organization, but their perception is a little off, you can correct that perception. And some of the messaging points that we're going to cover in a minute talk about that. But it's important about what their pre-existing knowledge, also humanizing the message. We know that storytelling is the highest form of communication for a species, so the more that you can wrap it into a story, the more successful your communication is going to be. Also, when you can outline the impact that their gift or contribution will make on the cause, that's very significant. It doesn't have to be aspirational. In other words, it doesn't have to be that we are going to necessarily cure cancer. But it could be, make it more realistic, more definable, that we will provide screening and detection services for women within this geography for breast cancer within the next 18 months. In fact, sometimes smaller, shorter goals that were more realistic were more persuasive and compelling. And documenting the real person or the track record is even better. If you can say, this is something that this organization has done in the past. Looking at the Dow example, we were able to showcase all the good work that Audubon Species Survival Center had already accomplished. Now, the Crane project hadn't been realized. It was something that they wanted to accomplish, but it was yet funded. So one of the things we could do was hear examples of cranes that had been put into wild, but we were able to look at other projects that the Species Survival Center had done and point out how successful they had been. Also, I'll tell you one thing that we learned from Ruth's Chris, and we've worked with Ruth's Chris for over 10 years now, and frequently our work has been in concentrating and supporting their great corporate citizens. They do it individually in all of their restaurant locations, and then as a corporate entity, they're incredibly generous as well. And over the years, we've done different audits and analyses to tell them, here's where you can be most impactful with your corporate leadership. We frequently have done it, not knowing this research, but just inherently. So in the past, we teamed them up with March of Dimes. And the reason why that resonated successfully with the organization is because the story of Ruth Fertel. She was a single mother, raising 2 sons. So the idea of motherhood and supporting mothers resonated with them. More recently, some of our work is concentrated on supporting female business leaders and entrepreneurs, because certainly that also is part of the story of Ruth Fertel. She actually was in the sciences. She worked at Tulane in the laboratory and mortgaged her house to buy Chris Steakhouse, never having run a steakhouse before, but she wanted to do it to make sure that she was going to provide for the future and for the education of her sons. So that's, by the way, why it seems grammatically difficult that it's Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Now you know she bought Chris Steakhouse. Didn't want to buy any signs, so she just put Ruth's on. So that was the emotional connection, where you're talking about the perceived understanding or the personality of the organization or even the business entity. This is the rational side of it. You want to communicate facts and statistics. Especially business leaders said it was important for them to know and to have at their fingertips all the facts and statistics that were relevant to it. They wanted to know the history of what was going on, historical references, as well as the institution's past success and experience. So it's interesting how, and these are being provided in the relative order of importance, that emotion came first, and immediately it's that rational side. So business leaders want to have an emotional connection, that is very persuasive, but very quickly they want to know, can you deliver on this? What are the facts? How significant can our leadership be? What impact will we have on the situation or the cause? And also word choice. It's interesting, since emotional was the last one and rational is next, one of the things that they also said is, do not be overly emotional. Don't pull on heartstrings too hard. In fact, it might not be necessary at all. They did say the emotional came first and more important than the rational, but they were quick to say being overly emotional or tugging on the heartstrings. Later, we're going to hear some emotions in particular are toxic. For example, blame. No message should blame or cast any negative accusations on any entity. You know, you should support us, your competitors not, is a real turnoff. So that negativity does not work well. In messaging evidence, and this is what I think is the heart of it. What is it that we put forth and how do we put it? And here's the relative value. The first and most significant is alignment, then reputation. Make sure that it's realistic and measurable goals. Also, the specificity that you can provide. What is the solution? Can you provide a solution to this? Return on investment, and then the expertise and experience involved. So first is alignment. This, by far, hands down, was the single most important part of that messaging evidence. That what you want to get across is that this is connected with the organization. The ways to do that have to be very obviously linked, but there's a variety of ways that they said you can link it. In other words, you could show that their employee base already feels strongly about this organization. So in other words, if you were reaching out to, Lamico, a medical malpractice leader, let's say that you're not a healthcare related organization. Let's say you're the Young Leadership Council. One of the ways that you could show this alignment is by going to Lamico and saying, this many of your employees are members of the YLC. Here are some of the leadership roles that they have. This is how involved they are. So the alignment there is not with Lamico's mission. It's not with the physicians that they're targeting, but instead the alignment is with their employees. So you have a variety of options of showing this alignment, but alignment stood out as the most important, and that you had to make that clear, crystal clear at the very beginning. So certainly if it's a healthcare, if it's prevention, if it supports physicians, then that would tie in with Lamico's business model and mission. But even if it doesn't, if you can tie into their employees, if you can tie into Lamico is a leader within their industry throughout the entire state of Louisiana, and your cause supports the entire state of Louisiana, that could be the alignment. But top of the list was, how is it that your offer or your request is tied to their organizational mission? Next evidence is reputation. What's the reputation of your organization? And this can be pre-existing. So if they already know and love your organization, that can be great. If you don't have that though, you can tie into this. You can use evidence here by connecting them with other leaders that maybe know your organization. You could say, here are other peers of yours that are familiar with this, use them as spokespeople, or you could use them as examples of other leaders that are supporting the cause. The reputation of your organization, though, is a difficult thing to do because it could be pre-existing in their mind, and you need to determine what do they think they know about the organization, what do they think they know about the cause, and is that in line with what you need it to be? If not, going to peers or other organizations that they would see as peers can be a good way to change that. Any questions on anything we've covered so far? Right. Next, with reputation, is establishing credibility through the evidence. So other corporate donors that have been successful, and they're not just looking for here people that have given, they're also going to want to know how those gifts, how they manifest in making a difference in the situation. They also may want to know how those leaders that gave were recognized. What role did they play? Part of this is also showing that it's worthy of support. What is the severity of the situation that you're trying to address? What are the chances that they can truly make a difference? Previous success is important here, and it does not have to be in exactly the same cause. So for example, Since I mentioned March of Dimes earlier, March of Dimes started actually in the battle against polio. And when that disease was taken care of, they moved on to supporting childhood development and fighting birth defects. The fact that they were successful with one disease state was a huge advantage as they moved on to another one. Even though when they first started, they hadn't worked in birth defects. You know, polio is not a prenatal defect, but they were able to translate that we were successful here and we can be successful here if we have your support. Another way to evidence that is an actionable plan. Make it very clear. If you can support us by providing X number of employees that will volunteer X hours, if you can provide these facilities as an in-kind gift, the impact will be specific. So that again, there's specificity and that gives credibility. The more you can paint a visual picture, the better. Make it look into the future. Don't be overly dramatic or emotional. In fact, the more realistic you can be. The reaction was they would rather have smaller, more incremental goals that they'd be more confident about achieving through the partnership than saying, you know, we're going to make it if the whole world is going to be better off from this. So some of the feedback was smaller, realistic, actionable goals. Smaller is sometimes more compelling and persuasive. And they also said, once you have them for that, if you can persuade them to that and you achieve that first smaller goal, then they're already in. The connection's made, you have that alignment, you not only do you have the reputation, but you've realized it with them, and they're more open and more easily persuaded in future requests. Make sure that the goals that you have are measurable and realistic. Make it so that you can quantify what success looks like. This goes back to, again, then repeating that realistic, smaller goals were important. Partnership for a Healthier America is a client of ours that we work with launching them. So we were with them before they went public. It is a nonprofit entity that works to eradicate childhood obesity in the next decade. Probably best known for Beyonce's Let's Move video. That's hard to compete with. But Partnership for a Healthier America, I'll tell you the research that we use Partnership for a Healthier America as the example. So the messages that we tested, the data that we provided, all was with the framework of Partnership for a Healthier America. And when I said the goals need to be realistic or smaller, this really resonated with this. Because the reality of childhood obesity, there are lots of things that contribute to it. You know, it has to do with poverty. It has to do with food deserts, access to healthy, nutritious food that's affordable and accessible. It has to do with obesity and genetic predisposition. It has to do with parenting. It has to do with education. One of the things that was really clear to these corporate leaders is that's overwhelming. You know, we don't have confidence that anyone is going to be able to handle all of that. Partnership success, really, they focus not on those other pieces, but just on obesity. They've also brought in other partners that are helping with food deserts and access to healthy, nutritious food for young people. But their focus is clearly on eradicating childhood obesity within a decade. Now, our work with them predates all of this research, but it's a great relief that they and we were on the right track. So the next one has to do with details. They like specifics. They want numbers and they want them upfront. They want to know what the results could be. They want statistics on the problem. They want it in short order. So like the rest of us, it's a microwave society. You know, no matter how deeply and profoundly we feel about a cause, we're willing to commit minutes to scan a few paragraphs and then we feel fully informed. These corporate leaders feel the same way. They want to know the depth and breadth of the problems, and it's our job to communicate it succinctly and quickly to them. They also want to know what anticipated outcomes will happen from their donation, from others' donations. They want concise communication on it, and they want it up front. Who, what, when, where, why. Don't overwhelm them. An annual report is going to be flipped through in front of you to be polite, and tossed on a stack to be thrown out at some some point in the future unread. So if you want your communication to really persuade and compel them, it needs to be short and it needs to give the details up front. Also, the communication needs to be solution-oriented. It needs to give some very specifics about what's going to happen and when. They really like timeline. The idea that if they did X by this date, then the organization would do this with them, and the outcome would be here, a report would happen here. The more specifics, again, in how the solution is going to happen. Make it measurable, granular, seem to be really appreciated. They didn't mind, it didn't have to be huge leaps. They wanted to know what would the incremental steps be, when they would find out, and how they would find out those things. Return on investment. This really echoed what we heard earlier. They definitely want to establish what's the business argument for them supporting your cause, your organization, or forming this partnership. But it's not always financial. Again, they were saying, while it's great if it improves their market share, and it's wonderful if their stock value goes up, they're just as happy to hear about brand reputation. They were really interested to know if our employees care about this cause, will the employees care about us being a leader? How will the employees respond? How will employees be engaged in it? So they were really open to not just writing a check, but they seem to be really open to, we will have opportunities where your employees can be engaged. Where, we've done a lot of programs in volunteerism, where the idea where people that are traveling to a destination can roll up their sleeves and during a vacation day, give back to the community they're visiting and do something significant. That's what we were hearing, that engaging their employees in significant ways, showing that the community would benefit or society would be stronger or better for their participation. We're all part of that return on investment. It doesn't have to be just dollars and cents. They said they would value improved brand recognition and awareness or employee engagement evenly with stock value or market share, which I found a little surprising. I would think that when you get to the top of an organization, the bottom line impact would have weighed more heavily in their decision. But the evidence is clear that they would not balance it more.
Just had a question about that. Do you find when you're meeting with a new client that it's appropriate to bring in research from other organizations that showcase what a difference it makes for employees to be part of an effort to improve the community? So, I mean, where do you find work with competitors? Do you bring in research from competing organizations, or how do you think about the research part of it?
That's a great question. The question was, especially when we're initially meeting with a client, what type of research do we bring in, and how persuasive or compelling does that research seem to be? I'll tell you, especially in that initiative. In fact, Corey, Melissa, and I just met right before this meeting with someone who hopefully will be a new client. In those situations, research can be very persuasive. I think what the people on the other side of the table are trying to understand is they're trying to visualize, how is it that we would work together? What difference would it make if we were partners? If suddenly I had FSC doing my social media, what would success look like? What would our business, how would it be changed? What would my experience be? Research has such high credibility, especially for people that don't understand numbers. We still put a lot of faith in it. Research, and you mentioned, do we look to other organizations? I think that allows, and this research was saying that you don't have to just say, your gift to this entity will affect this. Sometimes the more persuasive thing is to say, Tiffany is just like you. Find a peer. Tiffany supported this in this way. Here's what was done with that engagement. Here's how our employees were involved. Here's what we did with that gift, and here's the outcome. Really what we're looking at is the fact that storytelling is one of the things that's so persuasive to us. If you can tell a story where there's a character that I can relate to, that I'm just like them, and through research and storytelling you can tell me the difference that gets made, suddenly I'm able to visualize and believe this partnership could be successful. I would like to have that happen for me. That is what success would look like for me. Research research goes back to the specifics and the details that they wanted. They also want storytelling, but humanizing it. And I think by bringing in research from another organization, as you mentioned, that does such a good job for it, because suddenly it's a peer organization that they're saying that worked for them, and I can see how that would work for us as well. Great question.
Yeah, if you're talking about return on investment and something like brand reputation, which is fairly nebulous, and you're saying they want something to be quantified, how would you go about trying to quantify something like that?
So there's a variety of ways to measure what that brand recognition and awareness is. So we just worked with Aflac. And it's interesting that in the last 14 years, Aflac's brand recognition went from single digits in 2000 and 2001 to over 94% brand recognition throughout the US and Japan, which are the two markets that they work in. Now, they measure that on a continual basis, and they do it through a variety of, they do intercept surveys, you can do customer-based surveys. So there's a lot of data. If what you're looking at, so if I was going to a new entity, I could make a choice to try and do primary research, engage what their brand reputation is, or ask them what it was. What might be more successful is find an example of another entity in a similar fashion where brand is done. And what's nice is that research is readily available. IABC, their award program builds up. So here we have the award program that goes regionally, and the international one is the Gold Quill competition. Frequently, the winners in the Gold Quill have done research, and one of the things that they've measured is the change in brand awareness. And IABC makes all of those award entries available in a combined each year. So there'd be plenty of examples just in that if you wanted to find improved brand recognition or awareness by even a specific industry. So that data is available, and certainly the internet would provide it as well. So I think those would be examples. I think if you're going to use that comparison, I would only use it if you're planning on that being how you're measuring the partnership as well. Because I think if you don't, in other words, if I went into a relationship and I said, this is going to improve your brand recognition or awareness within your target audience, and I said that to Lamico, and I used examples of how campaigns we had done with March of Dimes improved brand recognition for folic acid consumption, which is something we worked on with March of Dimes. If at the end of the relationship, I haven't measured or tracked any brand change for Lamico, I think what I did is I created a false promise. You know, Jacqueline might have an expectation that that was going to be an outcome of our work together. So if that's important to Lamico, then I would probably use that March of Dimes. You know, for March of Dimes, these were the tactics we used, these were the geographies we worked in. We can do the same with Lamico. But I think if you have that conversation, if that's what is persuasive or compelling for Jacqueline to make a decision, if I haven't measured that at the end, then I think suddenly I've created a problem within the relationship. So one of the things I caution is don't use examples that aren't going to be manifest with this new relationship. If brand recognition is important to her, but what I'm doing is not going to impact it, or I can't measure it, it's outside the scope of what we would do given the partnership, then I would leave that off the table. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Expertise and experience. This is great to look at your past successes. You know, I mentioned that we did that with the Audubon Species Survival Center. They hadn't done it with cranes, but we were able to point at several other truly remarkable things that they had done through DNA work and other scientific methodology that's well past my scope of understanding. They want details and facts about the problems, potential impact. They like numbers here. So with this expertise, this was where that they don't want warm and fuzzy. They want hard and real. They want those things. Another thing to look at is other corporate sponsors. But one thing to be careful of, make sure that it is a peer organization. So where I said if I was going after Mackenzie, I might use Tiffany as a peer, someone that she would relate to and see herself similar. Here was a little, the corporate leaders said, for example, when we used message and talked about Walmart being a partner for Partnership for a Healthier America, and Walmart has stepped forward as an amazing partner for them. But they said, you know, Walmart, I don't relate to that. They're bigger than I am. They're seen as so large. It would make me feel as if my contribution would be dwarfed, might be inconsequential by comparison. So even if you're looking for other corporate sponsors that are really shining examples, make sure that it's not just another corporate sponsor, but it's one that would be a relatable peer. So that it's not that the size of the organization was something that's struck out, but also the size of the gift. In other words, if you're asking me to engage 100% of my employees and I have 24 employees, don't give me an example of someone that has 2,500 employees and they were all engaged. I won't feel that as a peer, and my contributions will feel negligible or insignificant by comparison. So the most persuasive messaging evidence, facts and figures, specific details, emotion, and then the focus of what you're concentrating on. So facts and figures, they want very specific things. One of the things that we see a lot with nonprofits is people want to know 80% of the dollars we raise go toward programs and services. 20% go toward administrative and overhead fees. That was a great example that came up time and again with the research. They want to know the impact of the support that they're giving and how that impact will be measured. One of the things that kept coming out is they want to know up front what's going to happen after we make this partnership. So our employees will be engaged, we might write a check, we might give in-kind services. How are we going to know that it's been successful? What will that success look like? How are we going to measure it? And it goes back to those return on investment measurements. But again, make sure that you're using measurements that you're going to deliver on. Keep out of the conversation anything that you can't deliver on or is out of the scope of what you could do with the partnership that's been identified. Specific details, and here they wanted specificity in when this partnership is established, here are the first steps of what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to engage your employees. We're going to reach out to them online. We're going to reach out to them in the workplace. We're going to connect with them through social channels. This is the time frame that we're going to do this on. The impact is going to be here. There's going to be an event on this date. So details on the action that's happened. Also, they want to know details on the type of gift and contribution that they can make. That came up time and again. They know that they're able to write a check. Frequently, the leaders want to know that they were being appreciated and sought after for more than just writing a check. And what seemed to come through the research was part of it is that the writing the check of the different types of engagement, being financial donation, employee engagement, or gifts in kind, the writing a check, the finality seemed to be when the check was given. That there seemed to, that was the event. You know, maybe the check was blown up to be large size. But when the employees were engaged, it had legs. Employees talked about it. It came up in their newsletter. It might be make the annual report. If it was an in-kind donation, then they're seeing community leaders and people benefiting from what they're doing pass through their doors. They're even being stopped and saying, thanks so much for letting us use your facility today. This was really helpful. So they want to know specific details and they want to know how the different ways that they can contribute, even beyond financial gifts. The emotional appeal needs to be appropriate and effective. You can certainly talk about consequences of inaction, but be careful. Again, negative emotion was a turn off. Negative emotion in any direction. You can talk about consequence of inaction when you're talking about the severity of the situation or the reality of what you're trying to address. And also they found referencing a child. Now, the research we did used as a structure, as a framework, messaging for Partnership for a Healthier America, which is battling childhood obesity. So it doesn't have to be a child here. I would translate that to really humanize the message. Use an example. I remember when I worked at Loyola, an annual appeal letter that I wrote that was one of the most successful was I created a character, gave this student a name, and talked about the opportunities that were provided to them in an academic year thanks to the scholarship money that came through the annual appeal. Because suddenly people were able to give to Sam, they gave more generously. So we know how persuasive storytelling can be, and stories need to have characters in them. The corporate leaders were saying, make sure that you use specific names, name a child, paint a picture about how that life is going to be altered. It doesn't have to be a child, but our message is for children focused. And the focus, community responsibility, mission alignment. In talking about this, how does this line up? Alignment, we heard earlier, was in the initial contact the most important thing. So here in the messaging evidence, what is the alignment? Is it with the mission? Is it with the business market that you're going to? Also, offer a solution to the problem, and it needs to be somewhat simplistic. They want to be able to understand it. And what was interesting is it wasn't that they were concerned that they couldn't understand a complex situation, but time and again they said, I want to be able to then tell our board, we are doing this. And I don't want to be able, I want to be able to do that, and the simpler and clearer it is, the more persuasive I can be when I'm passing it on to get support for renewing the gift or making the initial partnership. Least persuasive messaging elements, focus, emotional appeals without hard facts. Extreme emotional appeals, placing blame or guilt, and missing the connection between the problem, the resolution, and the impact. So things that didn't work were the negative emotions or overly emotional issues. Any blame cast in any direction was an immediate turnoff for these leaders. Also, least persuasive is when details were lacking, when it wasn't personalized. They said the easiest thing for them to do is throw out a pitch that they know they are one of 2,500 organizations that have gotten it. So think about that, especially if it's a nonprofit. So much easier to write a letter and mail merge and send it out to 2,500 people. But what they were saying is if they just took the time to know a little about my organization, a little about what's important to my employees, how my mission or the market that I serve might be better off because of this partnership, suddenly that goes from being trash to being a partnership that could last for years. And that was something that they mentioned, that when they enter into a partnership, they want for it to be long-lasting. They want the initial contribution and the initial participation to be the first step in what could be a long and much more significant relationship. Lack of information about how their support will impact the problem. So they needed to not just know severity of the problem and a request for a gift, they needed to know how those two things would interact. That by them participating, engaging their employees, lending their name to this effort, how the problem would be addressed or improved. Vague terminology, any stereotyping, no call to action. So no surprise, but these are things that they called out as really ineffective. Less credible strategy was also embellishing facts to make things seem worse than they actually are, or portrayal that if you just write one check for $5.99, this problem will be resolved. Those were immediate turn-offs because it turned off the credibility of the request. And nobody goes into a partnership with someone they don't trust, so credibility of the situation is key. Now we're talking about framing of message, and framing the message frequently is negative or positive framing. So, and probably the way that we see this most articulated is through political ads. And I don't know if you all have seen any political ads. So if you haven't, some of them are negative. I'll pause so you all can jot it down. So negative framing is the idea of approaching the topic, and political ads are a great example. It's persuasive when paired with evidence. What they thought was powerful about this is that it can sometimes be shocking. It can bring energy, attention, or priority to the situation. And that was something that was persuasive. Emotional connection, heartstrings are good. It's that powerful language, and it gives a sense of urgency. So negative framing with evidence can be persuasive. But don't place direct blame on anyone for not helping. So don't point out who's not on board. Don't say what will happen if you don't join. Guilt is not powerful. Or portraying the cause, being overly self-serving, really portraying the cause or the nonprofit is messianic, or the answer and solution, the sole leader or solution to a situation, lost credibility, which lost effectiveness. Overuse of negative framing in the problem can also have a negative impact because it will make them think that the problem is too large for them to address. So while some situations the severity or the significance is large, those might be steps where it's really important to make granular explanations of this is what we're going to accomplish in the first 2 years. Positive framing, aspirational or encouraging, we can do this together, what we can accomplish. They evoke positive emotion. And what was most effective is opening with a negative frame and closing with a positive frame. And so to make that a little more clear, opening and talking about the severity of the situation was very powerful. It got their attention, it built that sense of urgency. So opening your communication about the reality of the situation or the cause, the need for what needs to happen, but closing with a positive frame. And a positive frame, remember, they can't be overly aspirational, it needs to be specific and granular. So opening with childhood obesity is a very significant problem. It's costing this much in education or productivity or healthcare costs. But through your partnership, your engagement of employees, your in-kind gift or your financial gift, within 18 months, this is what we're hoping to do. So that's what they said was the ideal framing, combining opening with negative for the severity and closing with positive to make them able to realize that they can be part of a solution that makes a huge difference. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks for being so patient and going through all this research. It's been exciting to gather and collect it. It's also been really nice to see that I think what we do as communicators, I think a lot of this is just, I've been doing that, we've been doing that, I have a campaign that did that. But it's reassuring to see the evidence there. There were also a couple surprises in the research. There was a very large corporate entity that we organized their philanthropy. And we had done it for several years and it was very successful, and suddenly they had a new CEO. And the new CEO came in and we presented a strategic philanthropy plan for them on what they should do. And the CEO's response was, he said, you know what, I'm a product of foster care. I'd be interested, I think we should do foster care. And I went into this research thinking that the personal experience or the personal position of the CEO or the corporate leader would have a significant impact on the decision. That experience led you to believe that. There was a CEO, we presented a strategy, and he said, how about foster care? This research says absolutely not. That the personal experience or personal position of a CEO is not significant. And even in designing some of the questions, I was designing them to test out that would be true. What's really interesting is, of course the research is right, but when I look back on that experience, we put together a plan on foster care. As it turns out, we needed a nonprofit that was national in scope, that was in several markets. There's not a nonprofit that supports foster care. There are several, and they're not particularly unified. So it was a challenging thing to do. But what happened was, instead of looking back to the experience about that statement from the CEO, and I looked back, we came back with a foster care strategy, and that was rejected. And they went back to the other strategy that we built, and that one resonated with their employee base and was much more in line with their mission and their brand. So I was fixated on one conversation and one comment from the CEO. The research would have said that's not going to be important, and the research was right. I just needed to step back and look at the experience in totality, that even when presented with foster care, he selected the strategy that really resonated with their employees and was in sync and in alignment with their brand and their mission.
How do you juxtapose that with something like Miss Chris, where her personal story of being a mother, being a single mom, being a female entrepreneur really does sort of guide her choices in sponsorship and corporate responsibility?
It absolutely does, and I think Miss Chris is a great example, Tiffany, of that, because Ruth passed away, so she's no longer involved at all. And before she passed away, she had sold the company, so she was not an owner anymore. But her story that you just mentioned resonates with every employee. They, to this day, at all their locations, they feel that they are fulfilling Ruth's commitment to hospitality. This is how Ruth would have treated guests when they came in. So it's part of their brand, it's part of their mission, it's still alive and with them today. And so that's why they support female entrepreneurs. They support, also that there's a unique personality to each of their restaurants, that they are very involved with their local community, and that they are spontaneous and generous. When I think it was Hurricane Camille came through and flooded her restaurant and flooded everything, she cooked up everything in the restaurant and got friends with trucks to deliver it to people that needed it. So I think that's a great example, because the partnerships that happen at individual restaurants and the partnerships that the corporate entity participates in are in line with the philosophy, with the mission, with the brand, with their history, and it's easy for them to be persuaded and compelled when someone comes in and presents, this is what Miss Ruth would do. Then it's a done deal. That's a great question. Thank you all very much. You've been generous with your time.
Check the list, make sure you're like us on Facebook, that way you'll be able to follow what's happening with your organization here in New Orleans. Glad you all came, invite you all back and come again. Best I know that the other two programs that John is sponsoring are going to be presented here.
Sure.
Yes. We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll let you know before.
Oh, certainly. We'll let you know where it is. I'll tell you what, if we get the kind of response that we got today, this isn't a big enough money.
Right.
And we like that. So keep in touch, keep an eye on us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.